Hey everybody, my name is John Jahnke. I'm CEO of Tackle, and I'm excited to be joined by Dai Vu from Google, who owns the Google Cloud Marketplace. And today we're going to talk about the reactions to our annual State of Cloud go-to-market research that we published a couple weeks back, and hear more about how Google's evolving from a marketplace perspective. Looking forward to getting into the details. Thanks. So Dai, thanks for being here. Really great to see you. Excited to catch up today. It'd be great if you just took a minute to introduce the audience to who you are and what you do for Google.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, thanks for having me here. I'm Dai, and I'm the Managing Director for Google Cloud Marketplace and ISV Go-to-Market Initiative. So I am the Global Business Leader for Cloud Marketplace. So my team's primary charter is to essentially grow our partner business through Marketplace. So I have teams that are responsible for business development, partner engineering and onboarding, partner and platform strategy, P&L management, deal compliance, go-to-market initiatives, including incentives, and then optimizing our co-sell and field engagement models. And so I've been in this role for about 3 years, and I've been at Google for almost 10 years. Before taking on this role, I spent 4 years in the cloud product group, an area of the business called the application modernization platform. So that was scaling our Kubernetes serverless developer platform businesses and bootstrapping some of our multi-cloud initiatives. So excited to join you today and have this discussion.
It's been a busy year for Google from a marketplace and co-sell perspective. As you think back on the year, what are some of the highlights for you that have happened this year that were relevant to ISVs or partners or the overall ecosystem?
So 2024 has been a very interesting year. And I think it's challenging for some of our ecosystem partners when you think about all the things that's happening in the world with the election year and the geopolitical environment and some of the economic headwinds. But at least from a marketplace perspective, we haven't seen any real slowdown in the spend. In fact, if you look through Q3, our business momentum just continues to be really strong. And in fact, we're looking at our exceeding most of our critical business goals, because a while back, we've established marketplace as the route to market for buying and selling ecosystem solutions. So, I think I've shared publicly with you and other forums where we've been comfortably north of triple-digit growth year over year for the last few years. So I think that likely makes us the fastest growing cloud marketplace among the hyperscalers. But in terms of highlights, I won't go through a laundry list here, but I think we did a few things to enhance the platform experience as well as unlock new opportunities for both customers and partners. So, one big launch was the marketplace channel private offers this year. So that's really just a comprehensive initiative that allows customers, ISV partners, and channel partners to collaborate via channel partner-initiated private offers. We had some key launches on the product platform side. We launched private marketplace, for example, which helps organizations ensure solutions are being managed within cost, security, and compliance bounds as set by the organizational policies. And then we've also scaled a number of critical initiatives that we launched the year prior, things like AI and data marketplace. So this is around new solution types, really accelerate monetization of AI and data assets and really establish cloud as that preferred provider of AI and data solutions. We also launched a customer incentive program called the Marketplace Customer Credit Program. And this provides a 3% general use Google Cloud credit for procuring new workloads of eligible marketplace solutions. So this has been extremely successful as a lever for us to win these net new customers in the last year. And of course, from a selection and scale standpoint, we've added hundreds of new partners and new solution listings. So this improves our selection and scale. And some notable things to call out here, we listed a bunch of commercial LLMs, from companies like AI21 Labs, Anthropic, Mistral, and others. Commercial data sets from leading data providers like Equifax and Dun & Bradstreet. And then in September, we listed Oracle Database on Google Cloud. So this gives customers direct access to Oracle Database services running on OCI that are deployed on Google Cloud data centers, and then they're leveraging their applications and transacting through Marketplace. I think to highlight, in the process of listing ServiceNow, we've listed Workday, so some large companies in the business application space. So a lot of highlights for the year, but those are some of the things I would call out initially.
Yeah, that's great. We'll definitely hit a little deeper on channel and business applications as we go, but that's exciting. It's amazing to see all the progress. And I know the whole ISV ecosystem has been excited about the momentum you all have been demonstrating. So I'd love to just dive in. We published our annual State of Cloud go-to-market report and the results last week, which is a survey we do with ISVs and channel partners, just to get a sense of how the business is evolving from their perspective and, come up with some data assets that are maybe unique in the industry. And when we started this report back in 2020, 5 years ago, there were no analysts covering the marketplace movement. And, now it actually gets a lot more coverage, but it's still exciting to look at the trends year over year. And maybe the first discussion point for us today would be buyer behavior change. And we have seen a huge increase in the number of buyers, nearly 500% over the last 4 years, a 70% increase just in the last 12 months. And obviously, with statement of Google being the fastest growing cloud marketplace at triple digit, that 70% number you all may be even exceeding. So I'd love to hear just how are you thinking about the buyer behavior change as you think about the marketplace evolution?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think what you're seeing is just an ongoing trend in terms of marketplaces becoming increasingly mainstream. By the way, I love your state of the cloud go-to-market reports. But if I go back a couple of years, you used to have a question for the buyers, which was, are you likely or extremely likely to purchase through cloud marketplace? You don't do that anymore because I think that number would probably be close to 100%, right? So I think what we're seeing is that, software procurement is just basically being integrated into a growing cloud budget. People are basically consolidating their relationship and billings, and they're just seeing a repeatable path in terms of the procurement process. I think customers are seeing the benefits of having these solutions that are well, validated and integrated with Google Cloud. Now, in terms of the number of buyers, it's an interesting dynamic because I think what we're seeing is if I go back like 18 months ago, my team took a look at, our enterprise and select customers. So these are basically the top tier in our customer segmentation model, the ones with large commits. And surprisingly, there was a good number that had not done a single marketplace transaction. So we actually had a very targeted campaign for customers to get them to their first private offers. A lot of it was just education. And, since then, our internal data shows that once they get through a handful of deals, they expand their usage considerably. And we've gotten pretty good at understanding what those first solutions should be. They tend to be things like data and analytics or database or developer tools or security. And again, once we get some of that adoption, we're getting, broader coverage across our top commit customers. Now, so I think that's one dynamic. I think the other dynamic we're seeing is it is going more downstream into SMB. With SMB, it's less about, migrating a bunch of legacy custom applications. Like where we're really big in SMB is Google Workspace. So one natural place to extend the value of Google Workspace is through security solutions like endpoint security from, companies like CrowdStrike or Palo Alto Networks, or identity and access management from like Okta or Jump Cloud. And then we have a bunch of like productivity, document management, and digital workspace apps as well listed on Marketplace. So AO Docs, Loop Maps. So they're typically going to extend their usage of Marketplace from Workspace. And then the other piece they're doing is they're also just in SMB, they just generally scale their business operations through SaaS. So things like CRM and accounting and finance and marketing automation, these type of things. So I think what we're going to see is you're going to continue to see this sort of downstream, since I think a lot of customers see a lot of the value of Marketplace. And then as we scale our reseller initiative as well, because, a lot of the segment is served through resellers, I think you'll see this number continue to increase.
It's interesting to those points around SMB. One of the other dynamics we saw this year is just the deal size evolution. And over the last 4 years, deal sizes have actually gone down by 80%. And at first pass, we were like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But when we think about it from a buyer, the buyer community is expanding dramatically. And that puts you in different segments where maybe one day, like you said, you started with those large enterprise, large commitments. Those were larger transactions. And now it's a much broader universe. But in addition to that, we've seen the large transaction size continue to grow. So average deal size down by 80%, but large transaction size in the hundreds of millions of dollars in some instances. How do you think about deal size and maybe even the connection with either SMB or product-led growth?
I was actually a bit surprised when I saw that data point in your report, but because you're right. On one hand, we are consistently seeing our private offer deal sizes of millions and tens of millions of dollars, and we're doing multiple 9-figure deals in total contract value. And, if we look at our top partners, we also have data that suggests that when the top selling partners go through Marketplace, their deal sizes are about 32% larger through versus going through traditional channels. Like you said, I think there are a couple dynamics at play here. So I think the first one is that, as we discussed, part of it is SMB. So I think they are, leveraging cloud marketplace. They're going to purchase these finished SaaS solutions built on, things that are running on or with Google Cloud. And, some of it might be public offers, maybe standard per user per month pricing models. And then we're also seeing this threshold in terms of like these cloud commits getting lower and lower, right? So it's a combination of those lower minimum commit spend for these agreements, as well as seeing the value of these solutions on marketplace. So like in our world, our enterprise agreement, we actually lowered it a year ago. The minimum now is only 100K. It used to be, 10 million. So now you can see SMB making these smaller commits and seeing the value of getting, incentives and getting marketplaces to draw down on that commit. So I think that's one element of what you're seeing there. Now on PLG, this is a trend we're seeing as well. Now, I'm sure this is a hotly debated topic in terms of this is the original promise of cloud marketplace. But what I like to think about PLG is if you're a software company that is a PLG company, I think marketplace can really facilitate that. If you're not a PLG company, you're not going to automatically become a PLG company through marketplace. So I truly believe that. So I think if you look at some of these like open source or developer focused companies like Mongo or Elastic, Databricks, and Confluent, they have very robust go-to-market motions already around things like land and expand, and then with like low or no cost, and they easily adopt these experiences. And sometimes they might combine these with these larger sort of sales-led growth opportunities. So I think that's one piece. So I think what we're doing personally or Google Cloud is we're investing in a number of areas to, one, increase the experience across the full life cycle. So improving our sort of discover, trial, and purchase and deploy, and, improving analytics. So you can, do a campaign, drive something directly to a listing, and through UTM codes, track each stage of the purchasing and deployment journey. We're also trying to improve our discovery experiences across things like console search, marketplace search, SEO optimization. And of course, the other area that we're going to continue to invest in is this concept of first party equals third party, which is a very unified discovery experiences across all of our cloud experiences. So, one example I like to talk about is like, suppose you're an AI developer or an ML practitioner in Vertex AI. So that's your developer experience. And, obviously we have Model Garden, but suppose you need like a vector database. Well, we should be able to surface those third-party solutions available in context and allow you to purchase and deploy completely behind the scenes. So these are areas that we're going to be driving quite a bit. Now, the other thing I think is interesting is there are other sort of technology and dynamics that are evolving that are going to make PLG a lot more real and viable, right? They're going to be things like AI and automation, right? It's one piece. Hyper personalization, right? That's going to be another sort of big piece. So I think all these enabling technologies that we integrate into the platform, I think will start to make PLG a lot more pervasive and drive some of those deal sizes down per our discussion.
I think you hit on a really important point there around discovery. Like I was talking to Okta and they were saying, PLG is the wrong way to describe it. It's really, how does a user initiate a journey with you? And that user initiation can be many different ways. And I do think that concept of ecosystem where it's, if you want to solve a problem, it's not just one thing. It's going to be a combination of tools put together. So how do you make a user initiated journey for a combination of components really seamless?
The only other thing I would say is to make PLG work, and we're working across a lot of the organization. So it isn't just marketplace. It ends up being sort of marketing, cloud console, getting alignment with our product GMs. So it really takes a huge cross-functional effort, but we're investing in making that happen. I think that's going to be a big wave you'll see.
Yeah, that's exciting. So we touched a little bit on growth, and we made a prediction a few years back, I think it was 2023, that the marketplaces would hit 100 billion by 2026. And Canalys, Jay McBain, longtime friend, great analyst who thinks a lot about the space, they published a number that was like 85 billion by 2028. And the gap between those effectively turns out to be, their math is around 80% year over year growth. Ours is around 100% year over year growth. And I think in reality, it's going to be big. It's growing fast. You said you've seen sustained triple digit growth, and that's likely to continue. I'd be curious, just as you think more about growth, what other KPIs are important to you? Like obviously growth rate is one, but what else do you think about? What else do you measure when you look at the business?
I agree with you. I've had discussions with both Jay and Alistair from Canalys on this, and I was disappointed to see that their number was so low in terms of the projection and getting so conservative. Because in discussion with Jay, I think they had 45 billion by 2025 or 2026, and Jay said they undercalled it. So when they published that marketplace report in August, I was expecting a much bigger number. So I think they're just being conservative. And I agree with you. I think when you look at this, you can project this out and then benchmark it against things like percent of total cloud spend in that time frame or percentage of B2B software spend, and you're looking like less than 5%. So based on the adoption dynamics of our customers, I think it can be a lot bigger. But to answer your question about metrics, we track a bunch of things. I could rattle a bunch of things, but let me highlight a few things. So I think obviously the Uber metric is just purely just gross transaction value in terms of what is actually billed and invoiced. And we believe this is important because the more dollars you have flowing through marketplace, the more benefits customers are getting. And then we also believe ISVs will benefit as well because, renewals and expansion opportunities are better in terms of marketplace. We also look at what I call like ratable gross transaction value, which takes into account things like prepayments. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of what we manage the P&Ls, we look at infrastructure consumption. And so when you amortize these prepayments over the term, the dollars you see are more closely aligned to the consumption. So that's another thing that we track as well. I'd mentioned before around penetration rates, which is in terms of enterprise, select, and specific customer segments. What are the percentage of customers that have a minimum threshold spend? Could be, 1,000 a month, 1 million per year. We are also tracking things like geography and industry mix, because historically it's been a very big North America market, but we have very focused geographies in Europe, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. And then same thing with strategic industries, retail, media, healthcare, financial services. And we think, marketplace is an ISV solution to help accelerate our adoption of these segments. Win rate, deal cycle time, deal sizes, Google sourced opportunities versus partner sourced opportunities. We also look at the mix between our co-sell engagement in terms of what lands on marketplace versus partner paper. This is less important now because I think more and more is just going to be marketplace. So we're probably not tracking the partner paper as much. But these are the type of things that we track. I mean, the only other thing maybe I'll highlight is we also look at depth and breadth of adoption. So we look at on the breadth side, we have this concept of a co-sell readiness checklist. So a list of 10 things that ISVs need to do to be co-sell ready. So we're going to track the number of ISVs who have achieved co-sell readiness. It's very measurable and tracked. Number of ISVs that have done 3 or 10 private offers, because again, we want to get that flywheel going. And once they sort of establish that motion, they have 3 and 10. And then same thing on the enterprise and select customer side, which is how many customers are adopting 1 private offer, 3 versus 6. Because again, once they adopt just a handful of private offers, we know that their usage expands significantly.
It's great to hear just how detailed you're breaking things down, both from a geography standpoint, from an industry standpoint. And I think, the backlog for Google, I read the earnings announcement. I mean, it's a fantastic quarter. The backlog's growing really fast. You touched on business applications earlier, and business, I thought Oracle launching was a really exciting one. ServiceNow is another really exciting one. As you think about the backlog growth and even business applications, because I think business applications is the one category where I still hear people question, do buyers really buy this way? Like, I think security, DevOps, data, analytics, everyone's like, yeah, marketplace is well integrated. But business applications is that spot. And I do think it really does come back to that commitment, like your 34% year over year backlog growth. Change in buyer behavior changes things for business apps. I kind of blended a whole bunch there, but how do you think about that?
Yeah, so let's take those one at a time. So first on our earnings announcement, you're right. We had a really, really strong quarter. So, the revenue was 35% year over year. That's 5 straight quarters of accelerating growth because we had 23, 26, 28, 29, and now 35%. So that's just 5 straight quarters. That's very promising. Our operating margin was also 17%. So that's up significantly year over year. And then, as you mentioned, our backlog now is 86 billion. Okay, that's, like you said, 33% year over year, and then 10% quarter over quarter. So the backlog is just a tremendous opportunity. And of course, from an ISV perspective, you certainly, the immediate thing is you want to have access to that backlog. But as we mentioned, there's just a lot of compelling reasons why they should be leveraging marketplace. I mean, access to the backlog is one, but as they start to see the deal size benefits and the close rates and so forth, those become very compelling. The other thing I would also highlight on the backlog is something we don't talk about a lot, which is ISV as a customer. ISVs as a percentage of our business is actually pretty significant. And back in the day, I used to say, hey, if you're an ISV and you're choosing to adopt a platform and make a commit on Google Cloud, I used to say marketplace was not the reason you would invest. It would be something you consider, but it would be more on things around like technology and differentiation, data, AI, those type of things. But what we're finding now is as things become, I would hate to say, a little bit more commoditized, I think a lot of these large ISV commits are increasingly driven by co-sell and go-to-market. So it's like they're going to make these investments and commits based on the fact that Google Cloud is going to be with them to basically drive a very differentiated co-sell and go-to-market motion. So that is front and center in a lot of these ISV commit discussions. And that certainly applies to some of the business apps as well, because, like you said, historically, infrastructure, security, those tend to be our largest categories. And, even before this past year, we started to see big growth in selected verticals like retail, financial services, media, healthcare, sustainability. Those were the big ones. And then horizontal apps. But just to touch on Workday and ServiceNow, like you said, these are like just massive business application providers. They have huge budgets, large customer base. They're moving a lot of things to the cloud. And, without naming specific names, I would say, generally speaking, these companies are looking this as a strategic revenue growth play. This is not a, hey, let me list on Marketplace because this one customer just wants to transact on Marketplace. They're investing and thinking about how they're going to make cloud go to market as part of their strategic growth over the next couple of years. So that speaks to, for you and I, how this has matured. Because like you said, a few years ago, no one would be procuring these solutions on Marketplace, and now they're going to invest. So I think we're only seeing the beginnings of the growth that we're going to see in the business application space, and more and more. Now, the other thing I would mention is on the customer side, which is, how much is it going to require some level of sort of digital transformation on the procurement side? Because historically, IT stakeholders, business stakeholders, how do you think about these gatekeepers and how do you democratize some of these cloud budgets that tend to be more, line of business and business apps? And I think that's what's happening, because I think as more and more of these solutions get procured, you're going to see the diversity of type solutions. And I think what's going to happen is you can't have this central IT or procurement just be the gatekeepers for everything. It's just not going to happen. So I think what we're seeing with some customers now is they're starting to define things like, how do we define guardrails and provide certain guidance on how they can procure through Marketplace, as opposed to being sort of like this red tape and gatekeepers for everything, because that's not going to scale. And as companies do some of this transformation, that will unlock more and more of this LOB and business app spend that we're seeing now. So I think this is just the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I often joke that it's like Moore's law for software. There's just more software, and it's more pointed. It's going to be user specific and role specific, persona specific, and that's just going to create this continued evolution. Being able to have those guardrails to govern that, I think, will be powerful for accelerated adoption, especially with AI. Every worker with any specialization will have an AI copilot, and that likely will be custom. Will they be single platform? Who knows? I think it's still so early in the way that's going to play out. But you talked a little bit about co-sell. This was one I was maybe a little surprised in the data that we saw coming back. And it's been a huge topic. I know co-sell for Google's been a huge investment area over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of ISVs having a lot of great success co-selling with Google. That's the feedback we hear, which is exciting. But the dream for co-sell is, how do you get net new pipeline? I want net new pipeline that turns into net new deals. And I still think this is where the feedback from our survey says there's still some gaps in expectations from ISVs and what's happening with, the clouds more broadly. And 70% of ISVs said co-selling impacted less than 30% of their pipeline. 57% of ISVs disagreed or completely disagreed that the cloud providers offered valuable leads or referrals. In general, the sentiment ISVs want more, but it's complicated. Like, do you have hundreds of your own native services? Your salespeople have really complicated businesses that they run both first and third party. And in general, we see our ISVs who do engage strategically in co-sell see on average deal sizes be 40% bigger, deals close 20% faster. So there's some massive benefits. But I'd just be curious for you on some of the co-sell stats, the investment you've made in co-sell. Are those surprising to you? Do they kind of seem like where we're at in the adoption curve? What are you thinking about co-sell?
I agree. When I first saw these numbers, I was also a little surprised. However, I think it makes sense because I think if your numbers were more revenue weighted as opposed to like discrete number of ISVs, maybe the mix would have been different. But I think it makes sense because probably you have a distribution of unique ISVs who may be different parts of their cloud go-to-market journey, and maybe that's why some of the numbers are lower there. So I think the message that we have with especially some of the newer ISVs are the ones who are investing cloud go-to-market is, we do communicate and set expectations that it is a journey. Getting listed on marketplaces is one small step. There's no channel where you just, turn it on, forget about it. You see all this pipeline of revenue coming in. So we work with them closely to basically, you have to invest, you have to be very intentional about it. It's not a side project or a go-to-market experiment. You have to kind of look at it as a sort of a multi-year strategic long-term revenue play, which, could take a couple of years, depending on the maturity and executive support you have. And it isn't always straightforward. We've touched on discussions in the past around things like you need some product integration, you need some internal, operational alignment, sales enablement, policies, you invest in people, new capabilities. But what we're trying to do now is we're trying to be a little bit more programmatic and predictable in terms of mapping out the journey with these partners, right? So how do we get them to their first 10 deals and get that flywheel going? And, one of the things I mentioned is we have this co-sell readiness scorecard that we're working with all our partners on. And it's not rocket science. It's like, are you doing the right things to build awareness and sharing pipeline? Are you doing the right things in terms of resourcing, go-to-market and execution? And then are you doing the right things in terms of scaling your go-to-market? And so this is a sort of a regular topic that we have with a lot of our partners. But again, it isn't just the sort of the managed top tier partners where we have sort of dedicated resources in the field that have quota against these partners. It also becomes a little more programmatic and predictive for a lot of these scale partners as well. So I think these are the type of things that we're working on, but I think this will help and set the appropriate expectations. And then measurement's a big piece too, because I did mention we do measure Google source and partner source, but there needs to be a little bit more sort of a validation and feedback loop around the data. And this is an area that we're going to invest in quite a bit.
It's interesting. You touched on a couple different points: cross-functional alignment, executive support. This was the first year where the people who are saying they own cloud go-to-market, traditionally it's alliance leaders, like VPs of alliances, someone who strategically is thinking about Google as a partner. Last year, 59% of alliance leaders said they own the cloud go-to-market journey. This year, that number actually went down to 31%. And we actually saw a pretty meaningful uptick in saying they have full executive alignment. 53% of ISVs saying they have full executive support. I think those two stats mirror a lot of what you said. This is not a science project anymore. It's not an experimented channel. It's truly a strategic revenue channel. Does that mirror what you're seeing with ISVs when you're out talking to them?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to this maturation process where I think we're now seeing acknowledgement from the CEO or CRO that marketplace has become mainstream. It's not something they can ignore. So at minimum, it needs to be part of their SaaS go-to-market playbook. And I think what we're recognizing, especially as folks that are earlier in the journey, is they see over time, it may even become their primary channel for selling software. And some of our top partners are driving north of like 50% of their GCP business through cloud marketplace. So they're hearing some of these stories. And I think that's why you're getting some of this exact alignment early, even if the other metrics around like how much they're getting benefit from co-sell hasn't quite caught up. They're seeing this as a multi-year initiative. And everyone's focused on efficiency. Marketplace has proven itself to be a very efficient and modern distribution channel, as measured by things like deal cycle time, win rates, and deal sizes. And Our buyers are demanding digital experiences, so you have to invest there, right? I touched on this before. We constantly are polling our partners around the benefits that they're seeing through cloud marketplaces versus traditional channels, and it continues to sort of revalidate some of the things that we've been pushing in terms of like deal cycle times, standardized agreements, simplified negotiation. Part of the increased win rates that we talk about isn't just access to the committed cloud spend, but it's also because we have very strong co-sell engagement as well. So I think that's an area that we continue to get feedback and figure out how we can improve. So I think that's what we're seeing. So the metrics in terms of how they're getting benefits from co-sell versus the executive alignment will start to converge, where you still get very high executive alignment, but the benefits that they're seeing from co-sell will start to increase as they, get more mature in terms of their process.
We had a leadership meeting this week, and one of the debates we had was around the CFO. Do the CFOs understand this benefit? We're in planning cycles. Every company sitting down, thinking about what's their growth rate going to look like? How do they capitalize on where they're winning? How do they mitigate losses where they're losing? And how does this whole value proposition of cloud go-to-market fit into that? I've had more CFO conversations this year, but I still don't feel like the CFOs totally get it. And net new ARR is the most expensive thing in every company. Everyone's trying to figure out how to re-accelerate growth after the last couple bumpy years. So I'd be curious, how often do you see CFOs show up in those conversations? Is it happening more?
It is happening more, but I'll be honest with you, some of the conversations I've had with CFOs tend to be the things like you said. They kind of focus on things like listing fees and renewals, and they tend to be more sort of like numbers based, and they're not necessarily 100% aligned on the strategic growth play. And that's an area that I think we'll have to continue to measure and influence. So I think I agree, there's still some work to be done there.
Yeah. Another persona I've seen show up lately is corporate strategy. And they actually are thinking about that when they're looking at overall like go-to-market investment dollars and then translating that new product investments into go-to-market efficiency. That's been a new persona just over the last, I'd say, year that we've seen. You touched on channel. This was a big investment area. And in the report, we talk about channel being hot. And it's an area we've covered from like in the early days, it was a prediction. There was friction in the early days. People thought marketplaces were going to destroy the channel. That's not true. 60% of ISVs said, channel was a meaningful part of their business in the last 12 months. 87% expect in the next 12 months for marketplace transactions to include channel. 50% say a channel is a critical part of the strategy, a default component of their cloud go-to-market strategy. You guys made a major launch earlier this year. How's that going? What are you thinking about channel growth and, some of those stats?
I think it's going well. I mean, if you look at our private offers to the channel, it's up a pretty substantial amount this year, as expected. And, we're going to continue to invest. If you look at our multi-year business plan, we expect a very substantial percentage of our business to flow through the indirect channel, because as you mentioned, it's a lot of these enterprise deals are complex sales process and negotiation. They have multiple partners. As they scale their usage of marketplace, they're going to look to their trusted channel partners to help them, discover, procure, deploy, and manage all of these different solutions. And of course, they're going to leverage the professional services capabilities that they bring to help them through that life of the technology. So I think this is just the beginning, because I think, some of the things that we've done in terms of just removing some of the friction, we're going to continue to build upon that. We're going to do things like enhanced reporting. How do we make the ISV resellers like that be able to bring their channel partners into Google Cloud and Google Cloud Marketplace a lot more effectively? How do we enable ISVs to have more granular controls in terms of who they can authorize to resell? How do we make it more flexible in terms of selling into accounts where the commit is owned by another reseller? How do we enable two-tier distie and public sector? So this is just the beginning. We do think this is a huge market opportunity in terms of increasing the addressable market, but this is just one component, right? Because I think there are other things we're going to be doing. Like, for example, going to be launching very imminently professional services as a formal solution SKU, okay? And, the idea here is, things like training and implementation services, consulting hours, POCs, so these type of things that are more predictable. And when you sort of build on that, plus the fact that we're going to expand the reach of the resellers and get into things like multi-vendor private offers, I think all these things will come together. So I don't think as the channel as being sort of like taking the transaction capabilities that are happening offline and just bringing that to marketplace. That isn't terribly interesting. I think you have to bring in some of these other aspects around services and bringing other sort of vendor solutions to drive business outcome and value and faster time to value that will make it a lot more interesting. And I think some of the channel partners are recognizing that and having to sort of innovate their business model in their focus areas and expertise.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that transformation in the channel is well underway, and the understanding that value must be delivered. It's just not being part of the transaction or resell. So it's great. And the professional services is exciting because I think that will only help them continue to integrate marketplace into their motions that are more common for them. So we always make these predictions, and we did a webinar last week, and I kind of said our predictions this year were a little more standard. In the early days, some of the predictions were bold, very forward leaning. And I think this just represents that we're at this like scaling adoption phase of marketplace. And you said it yourself, we're in the single digit percentage points of B2B software flowing through marketplaces today, but still growing at a very fast rate, 3 times as fast as core cloud service growth in some instances. And I think the growth endurance, like how many years that growth can sustain, there's plenty of runway. But one of the predictions we made this year was around, the clouds actually publishing results, because you have people like Tackle who make predictions. You have people like Canalys make predictions. We all triangulate a bunch of data. And it's been really funny for me to watch. Like, I remember when CrowdStrike first published in their earnings call in 2020, they talked about their marketplace business for the first time. Salesforce talked about it earlier this year. Confluence talked about it. A lot of the names you mentioned earlier, this is strategic enough that it shows up in their earnings reports, but it doesn't for the cloud providers. I made a bit of a prediction to say, by the end of next year, this will actually start to happen. I'm curious on your take on that.
I would love to stand on top of a mountain and shout some of our numbers, because I think you'd be pleasantly surprised how big our business is compared to some of our competitors. But I'm not sure if it's likely, only because, when I talk in our investor relations, they tend to be a little protective in terms of like revenue specific numbers. We don't share, for example, what's our product specific revenue for BigQuery or Vertex AI, for example. That's just not a practice we do. But I think what we can do is start sharing more of the stories, especially with like critical wins. We'll probably share some related metrics, some of the KPIs I mentioned. We can talk a little bit around like win rates and penetration rates. So these are things that can be related to sort of revenue, but won't necessarily be something you can back into. So I think those are the type of things we'll likely do. And I would love to make more noise about it. But I can't speak to the other cloud providers, but I imagine they have similar constraints in terms of sharing revenue specific numbers for specific areas of their business.
There would be a lot of value in just being able to share more details around some of what you said by industry. I think by segment of company, whether it's enterprise or mid-market or SMB, international growth, just to further back, because as we think about ISVs going on their adoption journey, it's how do you get all sellers to be able to sell this way? That's a big, complicated problem for some of these companies. So just the more data there, I think, will only help everything go faster. AI was another prediction area we made. You talked a little bit about AI. We've seen massive adoption from the work we've done with Cloud Buyer Intent, just being able to embed more intelligence about buyers into the sales process, the marketing process, the corporate strategy process. I mean, how do you see AI impacting cloud go-to-market for Legal?
I agree with you. I mean, if you look at it today, we have propensity to buy services we provide to our partners, right? Which is effectively a scoring model that contains, what are their prospects and what are more likely to purchase ISV specific solutions. So we provide that as a service. But I agree, which is incorporating AI driven cloud buyer intent data, I think will change things quite significantly across all our go-to-market efforts. So I think that's one piece. And then related to this, I think on the solution side, I think the other big thing that's exciting is the Gen AI agents. They're coming, right? So, I think a lot of the discussions now are, the large language models and foundational models. Yeah, they're, interesting, but I think they're starting to plateau a little bit. And you think about all the Gen AI agents who can, collect data, have very focused vertical or functional capabilities and make decisions on their own. I think this can also not only just transform end customers who are looking to adopt Gen AI, but also the go-to-market and cloud go-to-market experience. So I think this is one area it's coming. And it isn't just going to be the ISVs. You'll see a lot of GSIs and RSIs investing in Gen AI agents because they bring a lot of the vertical and functional expertise with them.
I don't think salespeople will ever go away. I've heard that prediction from others, but I do think these supporting services around revenue systems where they'll get much more efficient with co-pilots and all those different functions. So that's exciting. Awesome. Well, I think we're up at time. Really appreciate Dai, you joining, sharing all the insights. This was super informative. I always learn every time I hear you speak, and I know the ISV community will really appreciate it. So thanks so much for taking the time.